I'm Officer Michael Hathaway with the Owensboro Police Department. Today's show, we're going to cover the evidence collection unit here at the station, and we're going to show a piece of evidence that's brought to station for safekeeping in our evidence collection vaults, and the process that we have to go through with that evidence to maintain a chain of custody and maintain the integrity of the evidence for the case. So, from what we understand, we have a computerized system now that our officers and our evidence collection techs can use to track the evidence that's brought in from a case, called the BEAST system, the Barcode Evidence Analysis and Statistics Tracking. So with that system, what kind of information can the officer input, and how do you use that here as the records clerk to maintain and track that evidence?
Well, the officers, when they bring the property in, they enter the location of their case. They enter the persons that are involved, whether it be suspects or victims or just owners of property, and then they enter a description of the property. And this can be anything from criminal cases to found property if someone finds a wallet. And from there, the evidence collection officers take the property and log it into the vault. Now, the BEAST system will track it from the time the officer brings it into the station until the time that it's released. And that's my job, is to keep all of the records straight as far as what property we have in the vault and what property is being released.
And so one of the processes that the evidence collection unit has to do on a regular basis is look for evidence of fingerprints so that we can try to determine whether the suspect in the case is someone that we have already dealt with in the past that has fingerprints on file, or if it's fingerprints that we don't have anything on file for, but we can post into the nationwide computer system so that if the suspect commits a crime in the future, those prints will be on file and we'll be able to track that to this case. So we have Ken down here. He's actually going to start doing some fingerprints on a piece of evidence that we've collected and that was brought in. So Ken, could you just explain just briefly what you're going to do and how the process goes for this piece of evidence?
Okay. What I have here, what I've been requested to do is to fingerprint a box. This box was involved in a vandalism, and it was left at the scene. And so the officers have asked me to, or they've asked us, they requested us to process it for fingerprints. Sometimes with boxes you can get fingerprints off. Some boxes you can, some you can't. So what I'm going to use with this is I'm going to use a magnetic powder, and what the magnetic powder does is it adheres to the oils that are on the box. It works well with paper products and cardboard. So if there's any fingerprints on here, we should be able to see it with the magnetic powder.
Excellent.
This is just made up. It's what it says it is. It's as you can see, it's metal. There's actually fingerprint powder and metallic fibers that's mixed into this, which causes it to magnetize. Okay. One of the things about this process is that sometimes you can spend a lot of time printing an item and there's just simply nothing on it. Some items don't hold prints very well. Sometimes the prints get rubbed off before they make it here.
Our evidence collection unit here at Owensboro has recently been able to actually check the prints ourselves here in the police department instead of having to send those off to the FBI. Is that right? We
send them off to APHIS. We do have a gentleman who we've contracted with. He is retired from the Secret Service, or no, State Department, and he is a certified latent print examiner. So he's able to go through and examine the prints that we pull off, and then we have a system here that we can upload the prints into, and we can check it against the database. Okay, I don't know if you can see that or not. There's a fingerprint right there. Okay, so that's how that works.
And like you mentioned, that is actually because of the oils that were left from
the oils. It's the oils from the skin, from your skin, that are left on the surface. Okay, and so the fingerprint, you know, that shows you your ridge lines, and your print. Okay, so there's actually a print here. Just kind of looking at it right now. I'm seeing a lot of detail in that print. That's a usable print. Okay, so so I would further process that print. What I would do from here is I would take a photograph of it, because to lift a print off of an item like this with a piece of tape, that can be sometimes you get it, sometimes you don't. So probably what I would do first is I'll take a photograph of it, a scaled photograph of it, and then I would attempt to lift it. The reason I take the photograph with a scale is that if I mess it up or it just doesn't lift correctly, sometimes you can put tape on it and the paper will come with the tape and you don't get anything. But if I've got a photo with the scaled print of it, then it's a usable print. Okay, so either our examiner can use it, or the examiners at APHIS can use it, and they can enter it into the system and make a hit off of it.
Now, unlike what people may be used to seeing on TV, like the forensics types of programs, when an examiner looks at the prints, it's not a computerized system that would match those up like you would see on TV. If I'm correct, that a latent print examiner actually manually looks from print to print and actually makes the connection for those two prints. Is that right?
Yes, but what's required to do that is that, so this print here, if I lift it, I hand it over to Sam. Sam will sit down and he will evaluate, who's our examiner. He'll evaluate it. He'll find the minutia inside in that print. We'll scan that print, enter it into the system with the data that he inputs. Then the computer system does it will do a nationwide search through the FBI if of any fingerprints that would come up with a match with that. So if we have a hit on this, then what happens next in the process? We'll download it. We have to compare. He will have to actually sit down and compare the prints that they have on file, the FBI in this case would have on file, to this print, and he would have to actually sit down and manually compare print to print and make sure that that's what it is.
Still an actual person that's going to be making that match.
Absolutely. It is entered into the computer. The computer sends back possible matches on it, maybe a top 10 list based on the criteria that we enter into it, and then it will send back a list, and then we have to go from there. So, and sometimes you can narrow that down pretty easily. So in this case here, if we enter this in and we get back 10 suspects or 10 people come back as possibilities on this, and you have, I don't know, one person who lives in Owensboro and the other 9 live in California, it's kind of obvious who you're going to pull out and start looking at that print. But an examiner still has to examine that print and make sure. And then after that, after he examines it, it's actually sent to another examiner for peer review, and they do the same thing, and they confirm or deny. Okay. So if there's a dispute, if one of them, if the person the next person that it gets sent to, if they don't agree with that, then it's not a hit.
Okay.
Both people have to agree.
Just in general, with your opinion, now that we've had Sam come in and actually be able to look at these prints for us here in-house, about how much time has that saved our department? Where in the past we used to send that print into the APHIS system and have to wait for that to return.
I couldn't give you numbers on that. I could just base it on experience, and I would say that in the past we'll send a print to APHIS, and we still use APHIS, but in the past we send a print to APHIS. Sometimes you can wait up to 6 months or more to get the results back on a print, where now we're getting those results back usually, well, if he's here, when he's looking at them, we get them back same day. So there's a big difference. Okay. Now APHIS has gotten a lot faster, but still you're looking at probably 30 days. And for them but they're processing the entire state of Kentucky. Where Sam is just working, where our examiner is working for us. So it's a huge benefit. Okay. Now sometimes we still have to send prints to APHIS. Even if we don't get a hit, we'll still a lot of times send it to APHIS, because then it goes into a database and it's doing a constant search and reverse searches. So, for example, what that would mean would be if you committed this crime but you've never been arrested, your fingerprints aren't on file. Well, in 5 years from now, if you do something and your fingerprints are on file, if this print is in this system and it's doing a continuous loop search and reverse searches, when you go into the system, it's going to hit on this. So,
Right, so it'll alert somebody at that.
that's right.
Even
It
if it's
happens. That
suspect.
happens pretty frequently, actually. That I'll get a call from APHIS on a 5-year-old case where they got a hit. You know, something that's 5 years old, and that's typically what's happened. This person's prints weren't in the system before, but they are now, and it hits. Okay, so we still send stuff to APHIS, but we try to process most everything in-house first because it's a lot faster.
And from what I understand, you're going to do another set of prints, but this time you're going to have a little bit of a different method to try to lift the prints from another piece of evidence.
Right. Okay, so what it is, I have a jar that is a piece of evidence, and it's connected to a burglary. Okay, so I don't know what the situation was with the jar, but we've been asked to process it for prints. So what I will do with this is I'm going to use a fuming tank, and I'm going to use an agent called cyanoacrylate fuming compound. It's a
I'm
big
glad
word.
you're saying that, not me.
Basically, it comes down to super glue. Okay,
Okay.
so that's essentially what it is. It's super glue. So we use water, the glue, the compound, heat. It'll create a fume in here. So the glue will it'll fume up, and then it will attach itself to the glass. And the same with what we saw earlier, it attaches itself to the oils. The advantage to doing this is that if we need to ship it, it glues it in place. So
you won't be able to lose the print.
you won't be able to lose the print as easily. You can still lose it, but it's going to be there for a while. So it's easier to work with. You have multiple opportunities to be able to work with the print, or if you need to ship it off to another location or something, then it just protects the print.
Is this another method in which you would have to just photograph the print once you get that to show up, or is it something you could still remove from the glass?
I would still probably want to photograph it, just because it's a good practice to do that. But glass is smooth glass is one of the easiest things to lift a print off of, so it's pretty easy. But you can still mess it up. That's why you still need to photograph it, because you're still dealing with human error.
Right.
So
And about how long does the fuming process take?
this takes about 12 to 15 minutes.
All right.
And then
All right, so what we'll do is we'll let you get that set up, and then we'll come back here shortly and see if we have any prints on this piece of evidence.
Okay. Alrighty. Plug this in. All this is a little hot plate. I've got a little water back here to create humidity, and if there's anything in here, if there's print on it, it'll adhere to it. Sometimes you can see the print with just the fuming compound, just the super glue. Sometimes you have to go ahead and add powder to it to find it. So it just depends.
Okay.
So, but
Excellent.
we'll see. We'll find
All
out.
right, we'll get her started. All right, Officer Bennett, so now it's been probably about 10 minutes or so with this fuming process. Do we have any kind of evidence that's showing up?
Yes, actually, I'm just kind of looking at this. We'll have to put some powder on it, but you can see it looks like here we have something, and this is just with the super glue or the fuming I shouldn't call it super glue, but it's probably a trademark infringement. But okay, right here particularly, you can see
Absolutely.
right here. Okay, and I don't know if you can pick that up on camera or not.
You want to try to hold it over here? Was that better for you, or?
Yeah. Got it. But you can see, we'll get something on this.
Okay. So like you said earlier, now just to enhance that print or to bring it out where it's a little bit easier to see, you're just going to put some powder on top of that.
Right. In order to actually to lift it with a hinge lifter or a piece of tape, I would have to put powder on it. I can't just lift it with the way it is right now.
Okay.
So. Better with some contrast. I don't know. I can see it, but I don't know if you can or not.
Right.
It's right here. I don't know if you can see it.
So believe it or not, we do have the enough technology here at the Owensboro Police Department to be able to lift something even off of a piece of glass or cardboard box, things like that. What types of pieces of evidence you may see come through that are the most difficult to get a fingerprint from?
the more coarse an item is, the more difficult it is. The smoother, the easier. So if something that's really rough, wood is very difficult. It's not impossible, but it's very difficult to get something off of wood. So a lot of people think you can unfortunately, as entertaining as television can be, sometimes you get into, people think you can do, I can't fingerprint a rock, but sometimes.
So this is what you called a hinge card.
This is a hinge lifter, okay? And all it is, it's just it has a backing here and a piece of tape, okay? Depending on what I'm working with, sometimes I'll use this. Sometimes I prefer to use a roll of tape, like it's not Scotch tape, but that's what I'm comparing it to, the clear tape.
Okay. All right. So we'll just watch to see if you can't pull this print off here.
Find it again. So all I do is just apply it. I have to be careful. I'm going to work the bubbles out. I'll try not to get any bubbles in it initially, but if I do, you just gently work it out. Okay, so there you go.
So a usable print that we could have analyzed here and entered into the APHIS system.
Absolutely.
Now, I've pulled some information off of our Owensboro Police Department website that covers the evidence collection unit.
Okay.
So I wanted to just talk with you a few moments today about some of the items that you guys do as an integral part of the department. Now, of course, every case that goes to the Judicial Center for adjudication may or may not require an actual piece of evidence to be introduced to either confirm or deny the guilt of a suspect. But in the cases where we do have to present evidence, you guys are a very integral part, not only because once the officer collects the evidence and brings it to the station, we also may have to call you out on occasion to collect those evidence. Is that correct?
That's correct. Mm-hmm.
Okay. So can you tell me a little bit about the process that you would go through, for instance, if you were called out for a scene where an officer is requesting that you collect the evidence?
Well, it's going to depend on what type of scene it is. If it's say a burglary scene, then we may collect fingerprints, for example. They may want us to process the scene for fingerprints. If it's a homicide, it could range anything from collecting weapons, DNA, actually processing a scene, stringing it, finding a trajectory of rounds and stuff like that. So it just depends on what type of scene it is and what we would do.
Okay. So let's say we do have you go out to a scene and you collect that evidence for us. Obviously, it's going to be brought back here to the police station where we have our collection unit located. We've already seen where we've had one officer bring a piece of evidence in, and he's used our BEAST computer system to log that in.
That's right.
Where he's located here in one of our lockers for safekeeping. Tell me about the process from there. Let's say, for instance, when you guys get a hold of that and you remove it from the locker, what happens with the evidence from there? Okay, so we come in each morning, and the first thing we do is we check the system for any kind of request. Whether an officer may want a particular piece of evidence sent to a lab, for example, narcotics. They may want it tested for to see if it's methamphetamine or cocaine or whatever it may be. So that's the first thing that we do. We check to see if there's any request for that. Then we pull it out of the locker. It has a label on it, and we'll scan the label. We'll scan that piece of evidence into a bin in the back room. And what that enables us to do is that we can say from the time that the officer collected that evidence until it goes into the locker back here, we can tell you what locker it went into, what time it went in that locker, what time we pulled it out of the locker, what bin it's in, and how long it was there. If it goes to the lab, we can track that piece of evidence from beginning to end. So every time it's handled, it's tracked through that computer system?
That's correct. That's correct.
So we definitely have to maintain a chain of custody, is what we call it here in the police department, so that when it does get presented in court, there's no ambiguity as to who had the evidence or who was handling it to make sure there was nothing done improperly with the evidence.
That's right. The chain of custody is a very important process throughout the whole process, if you will. It's an important function.
Okay. So we mentioned a little bit about the fact that you guys do get on occasion called out to a scene, and how to actually track that system, that piece of evidence. And we just briefly mentioned that sometimes it does have to be used in court. And you do have information on the website about your court preparation and how to present those. Just in general, what do you guys do here in the evidence collection unit to prepare to take a piece of evidence over for a court case?
Well, the first steps would be we're going to consult with the officer that's involved, the original investigating officer. It may be a patrol officer, it may be a detective, but normally we would consult with them, also with the prosecuting attorney. A lot of times the defense attorneys will also want to come over. We'll sit down, we'll look at the evidence, and there's a determination at that point on what's actually going to be needed and submitted for court purposes and what's not. So, the defense is as much part of the process as the prosecution is, and so we sit down and determine what's going to be presented. And not everything that's collected is taken to court and presented, because sometimes you collect something and it turns out it's not evidence at all.
Right.
But those things that are determined that are evidence generally will get submitted into court. So once that's done, of course, then we have subpoenas, court dates. On the day of on the day of the court of the trial, then we'll take the evidence, we'll scan it out, we will sign for it. If I take it to court, then I sign for it, then I'm taking it to court, and I hold that evidence until it's time to be presented in court.
Okay. And do you guys actually participate in the court process during the court proceedings to actually present that as
yes. Yeah, we will testify. It depends on what our function was. We will testify we may have to testify about chain of custody. We may have to testify about if we took something to the lab, whether who processed it for the lab, who took it, who picked it up. The purpose behind that is to make sure that the evidence wasn't tampered with in any way. So the systems are set up to make sure, of course, the defendant gets the benefit of the doubt as far as we have to be able to show that evidence was not tampered with or couldn't have been tampered with. I'm the only one that had possession of that evidence. And then in addition to that, if we go out to a scene and we process a scene, we may have to testify to what we did at that scene, what processes that we took, and so forth. So both the prosecution and the defense, they're questioning us to make sure that we did our jobs correctly. So,
okay. So after the court case, the evidence is brought back for safekeeping here in evidence collection. Is that correct?
Not always. Sometimes it's actually kept at the court. Okay. Once we present it, that evidence actually becomes possession of the court, and a lot of times they keep the evidence.
I know we've already covered fingerprints, and we use the fumigation tank for those.
Right.
And now we're going to see a little bit more about what we call Blue Star.
That's right.
Just a little bit about what is Blue Star?
Blue Star is it's a chemical agent that what we can do is we're able to go in and if we're looking for blood, where we believe that blood may be, and let's say a person tried to clean up a scene, then we can take Blue Star, we can spray it on the scene, and it'll give us a flash. It'll give us an indicator of whether blood. Well, I shouldn't say whether blood exists, because it's a presumptive test is all it is. So if we get the flash that we're looking for, then we know that there's a good possibility that there's blood there. If we get that flash, then we go in and we process the scene, we swab the scene, we swab areas for blood is what we're looking for. Ultimately, that has to be sent to the laboratory. The laboratory would have to confirm whether that is blood or whether it's something else.
Okay.
So
excellent. So we're going to go take a look at that now?
It's a search technique is really all it is. It's a search technique.
Right.
So.
All right. Well, let's go take a look.
Let's go take a look at it.
All right. So basically, we've come out here now to a piece of evidence that's actually going to be used in one of our cases. And first of all, what are we looking for here?
Well, first of all, this is not actually going to be used on one of our cases. This is something that's old. And,
okay. So this is something we've just set up for the... Okay.
Right. This is just something that's set up. So basically, the Blue Star, like I was saying earlier, it's a search technique, okay? So what we would do is that if we have a scene that looks like it's being cleaned, we're looking for blood, this is where we would use it, where we suspect that blood would be. Okay. If it's there, it should flash, okay? And then we would process the scene from there. So this pair of pants, I'm using this for demonstration purposes. Normally, what we would do with something like this, I can see where the blood is on this. This is just for demonstration. But normally there's another process that I would use with the presumptive blood technique where I wouldn't use Blue Star.
Right, because obviously this is visible.
Right, this is visible. I know it's here, and this is just for demonstration purposes. And and I think that's important to keep in mind, because with Blue Star you can get false positives. So there are procedures in place that you have to follow to make sure that if you get a false positive, that it's tested properly.
Right,
okay?
and that's the whole purpose of following up with an actual swab, for instance.
With actual swab and actually sending it to the laboratory.
Okay. So we'll just explain for the viewers here real quick what we're going to do so that they'll know what they're watching. We're going to basically shut all the lights down.
That's right.
It has to be nice and dark so that when you apply the actual Blue Star chemical, we'll be able to see that reaction in the form of a burst of light.
That's correct. The light, the burst, it should be a blue. It should show blue. And it could last anywhere from 2 or 3 seconds, maybe to 5 to 10 seconds, but it doesn't last very long.
Okay.
So normally what we would do is we would have a camera set up and we would take a still photograph of that. We would take a photograph of the item so we can show the court what it is that we processed.
Right.
Then we have it set up where we spray, and then when we spray it, as soon as we spray it and if it flashes, we get a photograph of it so we can show a jury what we saw, and then we further process it from there.
Okay.
So
so we'll start the process.
All right. Okay, you see how see this?
Right, so you can see a little burst of light there.
The way that if used properly, which is to spray it just like what we did, then it doesn't degrade DNA. I'll swab this. I can swab it, send it to the lab, and they'll tell me for sure whether or not it's blood. Okay, but the hit that we got off of that indicates, it's an indicator. It indicates to me that that's blood. That's what I'm going to process.
Okay. Well, as you can see in today's episode, the collection and processing of evidence is continually changing as new technology arises. The Owensboro Police Department strives to use new technology as is made available in an effort to keep the Owensboro community safe. We want to thank you for joining in, and hopefully you'll return to see the next episode of Inside OPD.